Adwoa sat by the wide glass window every morning, her cup of tea warming her hands. The estate was large, with tall trees and gardens that stretched farther than the eye could see. Yet the silence in the house felt heavy, pressing down on her. Since her husband passed away, the house no longer felt like a home. Every room carried memories of him, and every corner reminded her of what was gone. She lived surrounded by wealth, but her heart was empty. Her eyes often wandered to the garden outside. That was where Kojo worked every day. He was young, only 29, and his hands were always busy with soil, water, and flowers. He bent carefully to trim the roses, carried baskets of leaves, and watered the plants with patience. Though he did not speak much at first, there was something in his calm way that drew her attention. She watched the way he cared for the plants as if they were alive with feelings. Slowly, her mornings began to feel less lonely because of him. At first, their exchanges were small. She would step outside and greet him with a gentle, "Good morning, Kojo." He would bow his head slightly and smile, answering softly, "Good morning, madam." Sometimes he asked about her health, and sometimes she offered him cool water to drink. These moments were brief, but they stayed with her. She found herself waiting for them, waiting for his simple words that seemed to light up her dull mornings. One day, as she sat under the shade of a large tree, Kojo walked past carrying a basket of fresh flowers. She looked at them and asked, "These are beautiful. Which ones are they?" He stopped, surprised that she wanted to know, and explained their names with a shy smile. His voice was calm, his words simple, but his knowledge of the plants impressed her. For the first time in many weeks, Adwoa felt her heart lift. She asked another question and then another, and before she knew it, they were talking for a long time. It became a habit. She walked through the garden often, not only to enjoy the flowers but also to see him. Their talks grew longer each day. Sometimes they spoke of the seasons, sometimes of family, sometimes of memories from the past. Kojo shared small stories about his village, how he grew up helping his father in the fields, and how he learned to care for the earth. Adwoa listened with quiet interest, feeling a warmth that she had not felt in years. There was one afternoon when the sky turned golden with the setting sun. Adwoa stood in the garden, breathing in the soft scent of jasmine. Kojo was nearby, planting new seeds. She asked him, "Do you ever get tired of this work?" He looked up at her and shook his head with a gentle smile. "No, madam. The plants never forget your care. They grow if you give them time. That is enough for me." His words struck her deeply. She thought about her own life, how she had given so much of her time to wealth and duty, but perhaps not enough to joy. Day by day, Kojo's presence eased her loneliness. She began to laugh again, not the loud laughter of parties or gatherings, but soft laughter that came from her heart. Kojo noticed it too. He found himself speaking more openly, not just as a worker to his employer, but as a man to a woman he respected. He looked forward to her visits to the garden, to her kind questions and the way she listened to him. Sometimes, when Adwoa returned to her empty halls, she thought about how strange it was. A woman of her age and status finding comfort in the company of a young gardener. But she did not fight the feeling. It was real and it gave her peace. Her children were grown and lived far away, her friends only visited once in a while, but Kojo was there every day, steady and kind. One evening, after a light rain, she walked through the wet grass with Kojo at her side. They spoke of the rain and how it helped the plants. Adwoa slipped slightly on the damp ground, and Kojo quickly reached out his hand to steady her. For a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no need for words. The touch lingered in her mind long after she returned inside. The servants in the estate began to notice the closeness. They whispered softly among themselves, but never in front of Adwoa. She knew people might judge, but her heart did not listen to judgment anymore. Life had already taken much from her: her husband, her peace, her joy. If she found comfort again, why should she push it away? Still, she kept her feelings hidden, even from herself. She told herself it was just friendship, that he was simply a kind young man who reminded her of hope. But in truth, every smile, every word, and every step beside him carried something deeper. She felt alive again, not because of wealth or comfort but because of Kojo. In the quiet of the night, Adwoa sometimes sat by her window and thought about the strange turn her life had taken. She remembered her husband and the years they shared, the respect and the life they built. But she also knew that life continued, that her heart still longed for something more. The laughter that returned to her days reminded her she was not done living yet. And so, with every morning that came, she found herself waiting for the sight of Kojo in the garden. His gentle hands in the soil, his steady presence, his calm words, they had become part of her world. Without knowing it, her heart had begun to open again. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, something strong was quietly growing between them, like the flowers that Kojo tended with such care. It was a beginning, unexpected and quiet, but real. Adwoa began to notice how much brighter her days became whenever Kojo was near. The once lonely estate now felt alive. In the mornings she would wait by the veranda until she saw him arrive with his tools. She greeted him warmly, and he always answered with the same respectful smile. What began as short greetings slowly turned into long walks among the flowers. They often strolled side by side through the gardens. Sometimes they stopped under the shade of the tall mango trees, where Kojo would tell her stories of his childhood. He spoke of running barefoot with his friends through the fields, of his mother teaching him old songs, and of his father showing him how to plant crops. His stories were simple, but they carried warmth and honesty. Adwoa listened with interest, laughing at the funny parts and quietly holding on to the sad ones. In return, Adwoa shared her own memories. She told him about her childhood in a busy city, about her late husband, and about the children she had raised. Her voice often softened when she spoke of the past, and Kojo listened patiently. He did not interrupt or judge. He simply listened, and that meant more to her than she could say. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. They found comfort in each other's presence, though neither of them dared to name what they felt. For Adwoa it was surprising. She had lived more than 50 years, had seen wealth and power, but here she was, laughing and smiling like a young girl again. Kojo too felt something stirring in his heart. He respected her deeply, but he could not deny the warmth he felt whenever she spoke his name. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with colors of fire, they sat together on a wooden bench in the garden. The air smelled of wet earth, for it had just rained. Kojo picked up a fallen flower and handed it to her. "This one is not perfect," he said softly, "but it is still beautiful." Adwoa looked at the small flower in her hand and then at Kojo. His words were simple, yet they touched something deep within her. The servants in the estate began to notice the closeness. They whispered quietly among themselves. Some smiled, saying it was good to see the madam happy again. Others frowned, thinking it was strange for a wealthy widow to spend so much time with a young gardener. But Adwoa did not care about whispers. She cared about the peace and joy she found with Kojo. Sometimes they spoke about the future. Kojo confessed his dream of owning a small piece of land one day, where he could plant his own crops and build a simple home. Adwoa smiled and encouraged him. She told him about the times she dreamed of traveling, of seeing places she had never visited. They laughed together, imagining those dreams, even though they came from different worlds. One night, when the stars shone bright, Adwoa and Kojo walked slowly under the sky. The garden was quiet except for the sound of crickets. Kojo stopped and looked at her. "Madam, I do not know how to say this, but you are different from anyone I have ever met. You make me feel at peace." His voice was soft, almost shy. Adwoa's heart beat faster, but she only smiled gently. "And you remind me that life is still full of surprises," she replied. Though neither of them spoke the word love, it was clear in the way they looked at each other. It was in the way Kojo carried her umbrella when the sun was too hot, or how Adwoa prepared a cup of tea for him on cool mornings. It was in the silence they shared comfortably, and in the laughter that came so easily when they were together. Yet deep in her heart, Adwoa sometimes worried. She was older and people might not understand. She was a woman of wealth and he was a man of simple means. But when she was with Kojo, those thoughts faded. In his presence, she was not just a widow or a wealthy woman. She was simply Adwoa, and that was enough. Kojo also carried quiet fears. He knew others might accuse him of seeking her money, of using her kindness for his gain. But that was never his heart. He respected her too much to think of such things. He admired her strength, her wisdom, and the gentle way she cared for him without pride or distance. Their bond remained a quiet secret between them and the garden that witnessed it. The flowers seemed to bloom brighter, the trees seemed to offer more shade, and the air felt lighter whenever they walked together. Slowly, without planning it, their hearts had found each other. For Adwoa, it was a gift she never expected at this stage of life. For Kojo, it was a treasure he could never have imagined. Together, they created a small world in the garden, hidden from judgment, built on laughter, kindness, and unspoken affection. And though the world outside might not yet know, in their hearts they both felt it, the beginning of something that neither age nor status could stop. The morning sun was bright when Adwoa stepped into the lawyer's office. The air inside was heavy with tension. Her husband's family members were already seated, their eyes sharp and restless, as though they had been waiting only for the moment to hear their share of the wealth. The room smelled faintly of old books and polished wood, and the ticking of a clock on the wall seemed louder than usual. Kojo, who had only come to help carry her bag, quietly stood at the back. He had no reason to be part of this meeting. He was just the gardener after all. His place was in the garden, not in a lawyer's office filled with men in fine suits and women in bright jewels. Yet he stayed near the door, ready to assist Adwoa if she needed him. The lawyer, an elderly man with silver hair and calm eyes, cleared his throat. The room fell silent. Everyone leaned forward. He began to read the will in a steady voice. At first, the words were expected. Land, businesses, and properties were divided among relatives. Some nodded with satisfaction. Others whispered angrily when they felt their share was too small. Then the lawyer spoke a name that made the whole room freeze. Kojo. The gardener's name echoed in the air like a clap of thunder. Faces turned sharply toward the back of the room where Kojo stood. For a moment he thought he had misheard. But the lawyer repeated the name, his voice steady. Kojo is also mentioned in the will. Gasps filled the room. Aunts exchanged sharp looks, cousins muttered under their breath, and one of the uncles almost stood from his seat in protest. Adwoa's heart pounded. She turned her head toward Kojo, her eyes wide with shock. He looked just as surprised, his hands nervously twisting at his side. The lawyer continued, but his voice was nearly drowned out by the murmurs. It states here that Kojo is to receive a sealed envelope and instructions left behind by the late Mr. Owusu. The room erupted. What nonsense is this? One cousin snapped. A gardener? In the will of a great man? Another scoffed. This must be a mistake, an aunt said, slamming her hand on the table. But the lawyer did not flinch. He raised his hand for silence. The will is clear. The late Mr. Owusu mentioned this specifically. Kojo stood frozen, unsure what to do. He felt all the eyes on him, angry, suspicious, full of judgment. He wanted to leave, to run back to the quiet garden where no one cared about wills or wealth. Yet he could not move. Adwoa looked at him again. Her mind raced with questions. Why would her late husband, a man she had shared her life with, mention Kojo by name? Her heart trembled with both fear and curiosity. The lawyer slowly reached into his desk and pulled out a small envelope, sealed carefully with wax. On the front was written a single word, Kojo. He held it out. This belongs to you, he said. Kojo hesitated, but Adwoa gave him a small nod of encouragement. Slowly, with shaking hands, Kojo stepped forward and took the envelope. The murmurs grew louder. Some whispered that perhaps Adwoa had influenced her husband. Others hissed that the gardener must have known secrets. Kojo clutched the envelope tightly against his chest, his eyes lowered. He had no idea what it contained, and the weight of it felt heavier than stone. Adwoa reached out and touched his arm lightly, a silent gesture to calm him. But her own heart was not calm. Questions swirled in her mind. What could her husband possibly have left for Kojo? Why him, of all people? The lawyer's voice broke the silence once more. If there are no further objections, this concludes the reading of the will. But there were objections. A chorus of voices rose, accusations, disbelief, even anger. The relatives protested, demanded explanations, and threatened to challenge the will. The lawyer simply folded his papers and shook his head. The late Mr. Owusu's words are final. Adwoa stood tall, her dignity unshaken even in the chaos. She held her head high, though inside her chest her heart thudded with unease. She placed a steadying hand on Kojo's shoulder and guided him out of the office. Outside, the sunlight was blinding after the dark tension of the room. Kojo still held the envelope tightly. He looked at Adwoa, his eyes full of confusion. Madam? I do not understand. Why me? Why would your husband? His voice broke, too heavy with shock to finish the sentence. Adwoa did not answer right away. She looked at the sealed envelope, then back at Kojo. Her voice was soft but steady. We will find out soon. Whatever it is, we will face it together. Kojo swallowed hard, nodding slowly. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of something larger than himself pressing on his shoulders. The envelope seemed small, yet it carried a secret that could change everything. For him, for Adwoa, and perhaps even for the family that now despised him. They walked away from the lawyer's office in silence, the envelope resting like a mystery between them. In Adwoa's heart, fear and curiosity battled. In Kojo's heart, dread and hope twisted together. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of memory, her late husband's secret waited to come to light. The house was quiet when Adwoa and Kojo returned from the lawyer's office. The sealed envelope had not yet been opened, though Kojo held it tightly in his hand, almost afraid of what it might contain. He sat with his back straight, his eyes lowered while Adwoa watched him with careful eyes. She had seen many storms in her life, but this one felt different. This storm was not of money or property, it was a storm of truth. Later that evening, when the sun began to set and painted the sky with shades of red and gold, Kojo finally broke the silence. "Madam," he said softly, "should I open it now?" Adwoa's heart beat faster. She had been wondering the same question since they left the lawyer's office. She nodded slowly. "Yes, Kojo. Whatever it is, we will face it together." With trembling hands, Kojo broke the wax seal and unfolded the papers inside. The handwriting was firm, written with care. It was the voice of Adwoa's late husband, speaking across time. Kojo read aloud, his voice unsteady. To Kojo, it began. "This may surprise you, but before you were even born, your father and I crossed paths. Many years ago, during a business trip abroad, I found myself in great danger. Your father, a man of courage and honor, saved my life. I promised him that one day I would look after you. Life carried us in different directions, but I never forgot my promise. I have kept it hidden, but I hope this letter proves that your father's sacrifice was not in vain." Kojo stopped reading. His breath caught in his throat, and his hands shook so badly that Adwoa reached forward and steadied the paper for him. Her eyes scanned the words, her lips moving silently as she read them again. Her husband's words were like a window into the past. She remembered him traveling often in his younger days, coming back with stories of faraway lands. But he had never mentioned Kojo's father, nor the promise he had made. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, as though fate itself had been guiding their steps all along. Kojo continued reading. "I cannot repay your father for what he did for me, but I can honor him by ensuring his son has a future. Whatever the world may think, remember that you are tied to me by honor and by life. I leave this part of my will not as charity but as gratitude." Tears stung Kojo's eyes as he finished. He folded the letter gently, almost reverently, as though it were something holy. He pressed it against his chest, his heart heavy with emotion. The room was silent. Outside, the crickets had begun to sing, and the cool night breeze slipped through the windows. Adwoa looked at him quietly, her mind still spinning. At last she spoke. "Kojo, do you see what this means? Long before you ever came here, before you even became the gardener, your life and mine were already connected." Kojo shook his head slowly, overwhelmed. "All this time, I thought I was only a simple man working in your garden. I never imagined my father's story was tied to yours." When the rest of the family heard the truth, the reaction was fierce. Word spread quickly, and soon Adwoa's house was filled with angry whispers. Relatives gathered, their faces red with disbelief. "So the gardener is not just a gardener?" one uncle sneered. "He was written into the will? This is madness," an aunt cried. "He doesn't belong here," another relative spat. But others were quieter, their anger mixed with shame. The truth was undeniable. Kojo's father had once saved Adwoa's husband's life. The debt was real, the promise was real, and the will was only the evidence of it. Adwoa stood before them, her shoulders straight and her eyes firm. "Enough," she said with quiet power. "My husband was a man of honor. If he promised to look after Kojo, then it is my duty to respect that. Kojo is not here by accident. He is here because fate has tied us together." Some relatives muttered angrily, but others lowered their heads. None could argue against the truth written in her husband's own hand. Kojo felt torn between humility and pride. He had never sought wealth, never asked for anything beyond his simple work and the peace of the gardens. Yet now, his father's courage had brought him into the center of a family's storm. He looked at Adwoa and whispered, "I do not want their riches, madam. I only want to live honestly as my father did." Her eyes softened. "Kojo, this is not about riches. This is about truth. And truth always finds its way, even when people try to bury it." That night, after the relatives left and the house grew quiet again, Adwoa and Kojo sat together in the garden. The moon shone bright above them, and the flowers seemed to glow in its light. Adwoa looked at him, her voice gentle. "Do you know what I see now, Kojo? I see that my loneliness brought me to you, but perhaps it was not loneliness alone. Perhaps it was the hand of fate, leading me to the one man whose life was tied to mine long before we even spoke." Kojo's heart beat faster. He looked into her eyes, feeling the weight of the moment. "And I see, madam, that maybe I was meant to be here all along." Adwoa smiled faintly, her hand brushing against his. "Not as a gardener, but as something more." For the first time, Kojo felt the heavy burden on his shoulders lift. His father's sacrifice had not been forgotten. His life was no longer just his own, It was part of a story that had begun long ago, with courage, sacrifice, and a promise that had finally been revealed. The gold of that promise shone brighter than any coin or jewel. It was a treasure of trust, honor, and destiny. And in that moment, under the quiet moonlight, both Adwoa and Kojo realized that the secret in the will had not divided them, it had bound them closer than ever before. The morning after the reading of the will, the house felt different. It was as if the walls themselves carried whispers of what had been revealed. Servants moved quietly through the halls, relatives spoke in hushed voices, and the air was heavy with curiosity and judgment. But in the center of it all stood Adwoa, calm and steady, her hand firmly holding Kojo's. People stared at them. Some with disbelief, some with anger, and others with quiet respect. For Adwoa the choice was clear. She had lived her life following duty, wealth, and the expectations of others. But now, after everything, she was determined to follow truth, and her heart. Kojo felt the weight of every glance. He had grown up humbly, used to being overlooked, but now every eye was on him. Some called him lucky, others whispered that he had stolen what was not his. Yet when he looked at Adwoa standing tall beside him, his fears softened. Her strength gave him strength. At breakfast the tension broke. One of Adwoa's nephews slammed his cup down on the table. "Auntie, this is shameful. To stand with him, a gardener? Our family will be mocked." Adwoa lifted her eyes, her voice steady. "Shameful?" she repeated. "Shame is in lies, not in truth. My husband made a promise, and that promise was tied to Kojo. To honor Kojo is to honor my husband's memory." The room went silent. Her words struck deep, not only because of their truth but because of the dignity with which she spoke them. Kojo lowered his gaze, his heart pounding. Never had anyone defended him so openly before. For years, he had been only the man who trimmed hedges and watered flowers. Now he was being given a place in a story much larger than his own. Later that day, Adwoa and Kojo walked through the garden, the same garden where their friendship had quietly blossomed. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze as if listening. Adwoa stopped near the old rose bushes and turned to him. "Kojo," she said softly, "are you afraid of what they say?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Yes, madam. But more than fear I feel honor. My father gave his life to help your husband. And now, because of that, I stand here with you. To me that is a blessing even if others cannot see it." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "You no longer need to call me madam." His breath caught. For years, respect and distance had guided his every word toward her. Now she was offering him something closer, something deeper. "I don't know if I can change," he admitted softly. "Then let time change it for us," she said gently. Word spread quickly through the town about the will and the widow who stood beside her gardener. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, others gossiped in the markets, but there were also those who admired her courage. A woman of her wealth and position choosing love over appearances, it was something people would not forget easily. At night, when the relatives had left and the house was quiet again, Adwoa and Kojo sat together on the veranda. The moonlight spilled across the land, lighting the garden with a soft glow. Adwoa leaned back, her hands folded on her lap, while Kojo sat nearby, still holding the folded letter from the will. "This letter," he said quietly, "it is more than paper to me. It is a bridge between the past and the present. Without it, I would still believe I was just a man of the soil. But now, I know my life has meaning beyond what I imagined." Adwoa turned her head, her eyes on him. "You have always had meaning, Kojo." The letter only revealed what was already true. The words sank into him, warming his heart. For so long he had measured his worth by the sweat of his work. But here was a woman who saw beyond that, who valued his kindness, his strength, and his heart. Days turned into weeks, and the storm slowly began to quiet. Though some relatives still disapproved, their voices grew softer as they saw Adwoa's resolve. She was not swayed by their judgment. She walked with Kojo openly, laughed with him in the gardens, and allowed the world to see where her loyalty lay. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in colors of fire, Adwoa spoke words she had been holding in her heart. "Kojo, I have known wealth. I have known power. But they never filled the emptiness I carried. What filled it was your kindness, your patience, your laughter. You reminded me that I am still alive." Kojo listened, his chest tightening. He wanted to speak, but the weight of emotion made words slow. Finally, he said, "And you reminded me that even a man like me, who thought he had little to give, could be seen, could be valued." The silence that followed was not empty but full, like a song unspoken. The will had revealed a secret that could have torn them apart. Instead, it had drawn them closer. For Adwoa, It was proof that her husband's promise had led her to a man she could love. For Kojo, it was proof that his father's sacrifice had not been forgotten. Their love was not a story of chance but of destiny, woven through time, bound by honor, and strengthened by courage. As they sat together under the stars, Adwoa reached for Kojo's hand once more. She held it firmly, letting the world know where she stood. No wealth, no gossip, no judgment could undo what they had found in each other. And in that quiet moment, they both knew that their lives had changed forever. Not because of the will, not because of fortune, but because of love, the kind of love that could outlast whispers, outlast time, and carry them forward into whatever future awaited. The garden swayed in the night breeze, the flowers glowing under the moon as if blessing their union. It was no longer the garden of a widow and her gardener. It was the garden of two souls who had found each other, souls tied by fate, by sacrifice, and by truth. And together they stepped into tomorrow, unafraid. The end.